listener-supported radio, reporting the danger, unafraid, right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio! The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with episode number 4 of Cosmic Catastrophe. I'm your host, Diamond, from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project and Magnetic Reversal News over on YouTube. And now we are covering some of the topics that are a little taboo in more detail here on the radio show, Cosmic Catastrophe, episode 4, where we're going to continue our discussion with the Carolina Bays. And this is an ongoing discussion we've been having about the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Now, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis first came to light in 2007 with the Firestone paper, and it ruffled some feathers in the anthropology realms, archaeology, paleoclimatology, etc. Paleoclimatologists attacked the theory, but a few years later, the evidence continued to pile in, and the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is now gaining extreme traction, you may call it. Now, we covered topics like the black mats and the impact field and all the cosmogenic material that supports the impact hypothesis. And there's a few things that we really haven't gone into. And that is what we are going to be covering in episode 4 here. A very interesting topic, the Carolina Bays. Now, this is not exclusive to the discussion. There's also some impact type objects that are called Nebraska rainwater basins to the west of the Carolina Bays. And, well, they were first discovered, the Carolina Bays anyway, in the 1930s. And hopefully you can see the aerial photograph. I don't know if I'm screen sharing it. I really don't know. But the 1930 aerial survey for the Ocean Forest Company revealed these bizarre circular depressions that were concentrated along the Atlantic seaboard. But in this question, this was photographs of the bays, the first ones ever, near Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Now, the Carolina Bays are the most prominent feature in the eastern coastal plain of the United States, and they extend from southern New Jersey. Well, there's actually a few of them on Long Island as well, all the way down to Georgia. And there has been estimates as low as 4,000 bays up to 500,000. So it's our opinion, after researching and looking at some of the LiDAR images, that there could be at least 200,000 to 500,000 Carolina bays, as well as Nebraska rainwater basins. Now, this is funny because Carolina bays are neither bays or exclusively in the Carolinas. So it's a very deceptive term, and that might be for good reason. This is one of the most pervasive features on the East Coast. The name Carolina Bay is sometimes attributed to the writings of the English explorer John Lawson, who explored North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia during the early 1700s. This attribution, however, is not correct. Lawson described visiting a swamp that contained bay trees, but there's no indication that he wanted to name the swamp with the word bay. Now, the earliest scientific description of Carolina Bays is by Glenn, an 1895 paper, who used the term bay, which described as lake-like expanses to refer to these features near the town of Darlington, South Carolina. Now, Glenn, 1895, put quotation marks around the word bay. But he did not use the phrase Carolina Bay. In its subsequent publication by Melton and Schriever in 1933, and the Melton and Schriever paper was because of the newly discovered aerial survey. So Schriever and Melton in 1933 were the first to use the Carolina Bays with quotation marks around the bays, because they only had data that these were in the Carolinas at that time. So that is the early history of the Carolina Bays. And we've had lots of work subsequent to that since the beginning and the finding of them in 1933. Now, when you find a new geomorphic feature on the Earth, let me stop sharing because I don't even know if you can see me. Now, when you find a new geomorphic feature on Earth, you're going to have geologists that are going to go out there, look at it, and want to explain it. And shortly after the 1933 paper, that's exactly what occurred. Geologists went out there and tried to explain what was going on. There is the 33 paper, and I'm just trying to pull up some of this information. So the description that they came up with is completely ludicrous, first of all. And the reason is because when you start to look at these Carolina Bays in depth, and let's share the screen again. What you're going to get is a series of elliptical depressions that all have the same dimensions. And what I mean by that is the ratio of the length to width is consistent throughout the field. And this is suggesting that they were created all by very similar actions. And then the first description of how these were created is one using cave or karst geology, where there is some type of a spring that is migrating backwards and eroding a hole or a sinkhole in this theory to form, and then they collapse and then they fill in. Now, the only problem with that is that they actually went into some of these bays recently, within the last decade. They did sonar research and other types of sounding, and they found no evidence of caves, karst, or any of this description. And let me read it for you, if I can find it here. It's interesting. These bays are sometimes called moccasins, like moccasins, but moccasins. It's an Indian word for swamp on a hill. Now, just for size scale, these depressions or Carolina Bays that we're looking at here range from 30 feet in diameter to up to 3 miles. So there's a variety of dimensions here. And many of the bays have been modified by human activity, such as the conversion to agricultural uses, commercial or residential development, and even ponds. And these relatively undisturbed bays collect rainwater to support plant communities associated with wetlands, including vegetated lakes, grass sedge prairies, and cypress gum swamps. So there's a lot going on here. Now, it is still considered to be the leading theory is this karst theory. So most geologists believe that these bays are created by the action of wind and water, and it's really dumb. Okay, and let me just read the idea. Carolina Bays are geomorphic features developed on the Atlantic coastal plain of the United States. The shallow depressions are of various sizes that are often less than 10 feet deep and are oval shaped with their long axis oriented northwest to southeast. They can have sand rims on their northeast and southeast sides. Now, the origin of the Carolina Bays has remained a point of interest among residents as well as scientists for years. And in 1976, Kazorski interpreted bays to have formed as shallow lakes that were pushed into an elliptical shape by a prevalent wind pattern, eventually drying out as the climate changed. The sandy rims along their southeast and northeast edges are consistent with predicted bimodal wind patterns during the late Pleistocene. Now, what you would have to have here is a constant wind pattern over a period of decades, with the prevailing winds all in the exact direction over very large areas, thousands of miles. So clearly, this idea does not hold weight, in my opinion. And if you're watching the program on our YouTube channel, Magnetic Reversal News, there'll be links below to all of these descriptions so you can do your own homework and come to your own conclusions. And there is a better idea. And that idea, well, that idea is the impact idea, the glacier impact hypothesis. Now, this idea purports that some large bolides entered from the north across the Laurentide ice sheet, impacting the ice sheet near the Great Lakes. And at that time, the ice sheet was 1 mile or 2 miles thick at that region. And then it would have created numerous gigantic chunks of ice that would fly out and then impact the surface. Now, here's the problem. All of these bays are shallow and have been flattened, even the Nebraska rainwater basins. But the beautiful thing about the hypothesis is that if you trace back all of the bays to their common source, there is common sources, and that's Saginaw Bay in Lake Michigan. So there could have been multiple large bolides that either impacted the ice or electrically discharged, like Tunguska, above the ice, and the same effect, because it would be like a nuclear detonation above a 2-mile thick ice sheet, and it would cause it to explode into chunks and send out the projectiles. Now, if you look at the geometry of these ovals, they are consistent with a conical shaped impact structure tilted at about 30 degrees. And if you trace that angle back, that is how you get Saginaw Bay in Michigan as the origination point. And here we can see from a 2010 paper, this is the Davies and Gilbride. Using the measured alignments of the Carolina Bay fields, they generate a great circle path. Now, what does that mean? It means that all these objects are contained within a circle, as would be expected if they were ejecta from a major impact. And interestingly enough, it appears as if most of the bolide projectiles hit the east coast of the U.S. And if you look at the prevalence of the Carolina Bays, it is no wonder that the Clovis culture and all humans on the East Coast disappeared 12,900 years ago. That we would have been completely obliterated. Now, let's get back to the fact that all of these bays have flat, shallow bottoms and what was going on at the time. When you have a large bolide or multiple impactors either exploding or impacting the ice sheet at the time, 12,900 years ago, it's going to create seismic shock on the Earth. And it's estimated it would be equivalent to a magnitude 9 earthquake or greater. Now, this is going to cause liquefaction on the coastal plain, and that would be the East Coast. It's mostly unconsolidated sand sediments comprising the coastal plain. And in fact, that is what would be happening. Additional to that, if we were to have this 9 magnitude seismic event occurring during the initial blast, the projectiles only take a few seconds to reach their secondary impact, the ice pieces, in otherwise. So the ground is still going to be rocking and liquefacting. And so you would make these huge conical impact structures that would rapidly be smoothed, flattened down, homogeneous across the entire spectrum of the impactors, which is exactly what the Carolina Bays display. A homogeneity that is unexplainable by anything other than liquefaction. And liquefaction is nothing more than if you took a plate of wet sand, a slurry, and you made a depression in it, and then you took that plate and shook it, the depression is going to smooth out, but still maintain its character. And also the fact that the largest rims on these bays are to the south and east suggests the bolide is coming from the Great Lakes region, coming from the north, moving southeast. And so the Nebraska rainwater basins, well, those would just be another bolide coming in at a different angle and forming that field. And the Nebraska rainwater basins have similar shape and character, including the shallow, smooth, flat bottoms that would have been caused by liquefaction. Now, all this work is completely, it blows the lid off of the fake terrestrial explanation. And so the norm in science and geology is gradualism. And most of these scientists want to explain things that they don't understand using, well, modern analogs, things that are happening now. And unfortunately, this is not good for science, because in order to progress in science, you need to test your hypothesis and come up with bigger and better explanations. And the glacier ice impact hypothesis is a better and more thorough explanation of what is happening here with the Carolina Bays and the Nebraska rainwater basin. Now, you might ask yourself, why doesn't anyone support this? Well, there's lots of scientists that are now supporting this idea, because just like the initial 2007 Firestone paper that got attacked, there is evidence pouring in that these may in fact be ice impact structures from a major impact that hit the ice sheet somewhere near the Great Lakes. Now, early on, many people traced lines directly back from the Carolina Bays through their central axis, and they couldn't really come up with any points of impact. The lines didn't really converge anywhere, and that's because they were using straight lines on maps. And so the modern work is using parabolic trajectories and then tracing them back, and you can definitely come to a common impactor site in multiple locations, including, like I said earlier, Saginaw Bay and Lake Michigan. So if we have 500,000 impacts, and there's probably more pieces of ice than that hitting, because they're hitting one over another and they're erasing each other during this debris barrage. Not a single plant or animal or human could have lived unless they were really lucky. Really lucky. Because it appears as if the entire coastal plain was obliterated for thousands of square miles. Now, recent evidence to support this, not only do we have the ring-like structure where you can get a central impactor, and the fact that they all are, it's just amazing that they all are so symmetrical. And here's the first realization that this is probably cosmogenic. And it's a paper coming out in 2007, Howard, West, Firestone, Kennett, Kimball, Newell, and Cobres. And it's titled Evidence for an Extraterrestrial Impact Origin of the Carolina Bays on the Atlantic coast of North America. Now, the Carolina Bays, one of the most conspicuous geomorphic features on the Atlantic coastal plain of the United States, are a group of about 500,000 oriented, crater-like elliptical lakes, wetlands, and depressions, ranging from a few dozen meters to about 11 kilometers in length. And although long proposed as impact structures, this origin for the Carolina Bays has remained controversial, mainly because of an apparent absence of associated extraterrestrial materials. Now, analysis of bay orientation has shown that their long axis converge near the Great Lakes. And we have shared with you those visuals earlier, and I'm sure you can conclude the same. And because of this convergence near the Great Lakes, it suggests that an impact or airburst over that region may have formed the bays through secondary ice impacts. The problem is that bay dates have been reported over a wide range. And that has a lot to do with the fact that they are not sampling correctly. And because of the wide range of dates that they got, it called into question whether the Carolina Bays formed simultaneously. And although this issue remains unresolved and controversial, many bay researchers who subscribe to widely differing theories agree that the modern Carolina Bays have been subject to repeated modification and that they most likely evolved from some type of ancestral depression. But now, 2007, for the first time, this team presented conclusive geochemical and sedimentary evidence in support of an extraterrestrial connection for the Carolina Bays. So analysis of the sediment from the rim sands and the basins of 15 bays that were widely distributed across North and South Carolina revealed anomalously high abundances of microspherules, iridium, fullerenes, with extraterrestrial helium, carbon spherules, and even glass-like carbon, and other potential markers for extraterrestrial impact. And no such markers are found underneath in the paleosols beneath the rim sands. So this assemblage of geochemical and sedimentary structures of extraterrestrial impact found at the bay sediments are essentially the same as the North American Younger Dryas impact boundary finds and the black mats, and they all date to 12/9. And now, since 2007, subsequent researchers have successfully dated Carolina Bays to 12,900 years old. And this suggests something, well, undeniable, that a large impact occurred 12,900 years ago, reorganizing world populations, killing off megafauna in North America, causing a mass extinction, darkening of the skies, burning of the terrestrial boreal forests. It was literally hell on earth. And none of us want to be alive during an event like that. Now, we're about to go to commercial, but when we come back, we're going to reveal who the most important researcher has become on the Carolina Bays, and his name is Antonio Zamora. And he has done some of the most thorough work on Carolina Bay research since the discovery and the fact that the evidence for an extraterrestrial impact origin was then confirmed in 2007. And Zamora, who I just got off, we just talked last night via email, is going to be joining us for a podcast soon on Magnetic Reversal News. So make sure you check out our two YouTube channels, Oppenheimer Ranch Project and Magnetic Reversal News on YouTube, because we cover all these interesting topics and more, and I'm sure you'll be fascinated. Now, Antonio Zamora has been working on this for quite some time. He has a few papers out, and he's got a best-selling book on Amazon on the topic. And he is no slouch. Antonio Zamora is a scientist like myself, but his expertise is in chemistry. He's a hematology technician and a computer scientist. And he's currently retired and focusing his life on the Carolina Bays. And we'll be back with more after these messages. Thanks for tuning in.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine. Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
Join me on the Brian Ruhe Show on Revolution Radio, Eastern Standard Time, every Tuesday night from 6 to 8. We talk about the four most vital things, in my view, affecting all of humanity. #1 is UFOs and aliens and their agenda for the advancement of humanity. #2 is the Jewish establishment's control over all aspects of human civilization. #3, the truth about Adolf Hitler, how he was the opposite of what we've been told. #4 is Advanced Ancient Global Civilizations. Join me on the Brian Ruhe Show, Tuesday nights from 6 to 8 on Studio B on Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at higher risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
And we're back with the second half of Cosmic Catastrophe, episode 4, the Carolina Bays. And we just left off talking about Antonio Zamora, who we are in close contact with. And listen to this. He almost died last week. That's even crazier. So we need to get him on the show ASAP, but he is recovering and has a new pacemaker. His heart rate dropped really low. And if you go over to his YouTube channel, you can check out, he's been documenting his progress. Now, Zamora really is the top expert on the Carolina Bays. And his book, the first book he wrote, The Neglected Carolina Bays, you can pick up on Amazon, so go check that out. Now, Zamora explains what the Carolina Bays are. And let's see if I know how to use this. Okay, so the book is The Neglected Carolina Bays by Antonio Zamora. And he explains that these Carolina Bays are the result of the impact of fragments of ice from a glacier cap on the Laurentian ice sheet that covered the area of the Great Lakes located 1,500 kilometers from the so-called Carolina Bays area. Now, these fragments originated when a planetary body was impacted in the Great Lakes area, specifically around Saginaw Bay. The ice fragments, which constituted the ejecta, gave rise to the Carolina Bays when they impacted on materials that were not very consolidated and had a certain water content, causing liquefaction and acoustic fluidization, giving rise to the generation of secondary craters. These secondary craters initially had an inclined cone shape because they were originated by oblique impacts and morphology that by a viscous relaxation process would end up giving rise to the current elliptical shape that can be seen in aerial, satellite, and LiDAR photographs. The divergence from this main form are due to several factors that Zamora demonstrates through a series of experiments with analogical models. And he's done them, and you can watch the videos of them shooting ice chunks into this, these sediments and making these structures. And so thus, the Carolina Bays can be defined, and I quote, as shallow elliptical depressions with raised edges over unconsolidated terrain whose major axis is oriented towards the Great Lakes region. The prototypical Carolina Bay are elliptical in the mathematical sense to have an average width to length ratio of approximately 0.58. Carolina Bays are found within a 1,500 kilometer radius of the Great Lakes. So this is, and he's even, Zamora is now going in Carolina Bay, one bay at a time, and dissecting it and breaking it down. Now, their origin cannot be due, according to the data so far, to any normal geologic process. The proposed terrestrial origins are the action of water and wind currents, thermokarst, the action of groundwater dissolution, installation of lake areas by wind action, and processes similar to those that form the Australian salt lakes, which look nothing like this, by the way. All of these, the first and second, are the ones that have most followers among non-impactists. Do you like that term, non-impactists? They're actually non-catastrophists, and they will soon be left in the dust because the future of geology is catastrophism. Period. What we can say is that it has no experimental or observational basis to prove it. That's the terrestrial model. And so based on what you've heard here so far today, I think many of you are now probably leaning towards the impact hypothesis. Now, regarding its genesis by impact, it's worth mentioning that its attachment to an impact origin is not only due to the ideas of Antonio Zamora. we saw I just cited the 2000 paper that had a lot of the authors, the initial authors on the Firestone paper, including Firestone himself. Where is that paper? And evidence for an extraterrestrial impact origin of the Carolina Bays. And that's Kennett, Firestone, West, Howard, Kimball, and Newell. So there's many scientists that are now lining up with this hypothesis. But for me, the jewel of the crown is the whole argument about evidence of the impact origin of the Carolina Bays. And that includes the cosmogenic precursors, the microspherules, all the things that you would get, especially if an object exploded or discharged over the ice sheet. So let me draw a picture for you. There's a large comet that enters the inner solar system and breaks apart into pieces. Two of the large, or three, or maybe more, come flying in over the Laurentide ice sheet 12,900 years ago. And as they approach the surface of the Earth, a few miles up, they discharge to the tune of hundreds of nuclear warheads, fragmenting thousands of pieces of ice. Some of these ice chunks, based on the size of the bays, had to be kilometers wide. That is a big ice chunk. And it would be coming at you with ballistic speed. At the same time, the Earth is shaking. The shock wave alone would have blown down trees and toppled animals, blowing out eardrums of humans. And then if you do some of the math, the resulting impactors, the bays themselves, here and here and here, the smallest bays that are just a few hundred feet across would create a seismic signature of a 7.4 magnitude earthquake. And the bigger bays that measure 11, 12 kilometers, that could be up to an 8 magnitude earthquake. So at the same time, the entire Earth is rattling. Each individual impact, which they're estimated to be 500,000. What you would get on the East Coast is 500,000 earthquakes, magnitude 7 to 8, all within a period of a few minutes. That is unimaginable. 500,000 earthquakes at the same time on the East Coast, and you would then get your liquefaction. So the evidence at this point is undeniable that this is definitely an extraterrestrial origin. And now, how do you get the extraterrestrial material from the discharge site over here to the East Coast? Well, when it explodes above the ice sheet and shatters it, all that dust and all that debris and material from the discharge are going to be in the atmosphere, and they are going to be captured by the ice chunks, literally covered in them. And so these gigantic ballistic ice projectiles, it would have been a sight to see. You would have seen millions of them flying overhead as they re-entered at a very high angle. You couldn't run. It would have been hell on earth. Now, the trajectory of these and the distance they traveled, look at how far they traveled. It's over 1,000 miles. These ice chunks literally were blown out and up into space and then re-entered. They went very high in some estimates. So this is an amazing time on Earth. Now, we're just looking at the East Coast of the United States and over to Nebraska, where there were some impacts. So nothing in these regions survived. There's no way you're going to survive 500,000 7 to 8 magnitude earthquakes while millions of impacts are happening simultaneously, unless you're thousands of feet underground. And some people might have been deep in the earth and have made it. Some people. But most people were liquefied, along with the animals, plants, and other things. And so this is just the east coast of the U.S. What's happening on the west coast at the same time is major flood events, washing people and entire civilizations away and into the Pacific. 12-mile wide outwash plains flowing across the surface in debris flows. Waterfalls 100 times bigger than Niagara. And then in North Africa, it appears, in other desert regions, that huge flooding events were occurring. So this is a very unique time, very recently on Earth. And there's really no other time like this, geologically speaking, for at least millions of years, and probably the beginning of the Ice Age. And so the fires didn't originate here, probably, because where the Carolina Bays were getting hit, think of all of that glacial ice is now penetrated, is now underground. And this region is very swampy today. 12,800 years later, it is still containing the water from the ice sheet from that event, potentially. So it's a very, it's a very interesting time on Earth. And most people think that the Clovis went extinct. And in our last program, we laid out a very clear evidence that the Clovis didn't go extinct. Any of the Clovis on the East Coast did. They were all killed. But if you weren't near some of the impactors, if you weren't in this cone, you could have made it. And in fact, some of the earliest evidence of Folsom is coming from right here in the center here. Right after the 12-9 event, 12-7, there's Folsom people. And the Folsom are just the Clovis that made it and had to change their technology a little bit because they had no more mammoths on Earth in this region. They had bison. The mammoths had gone extinct here in North America at 12-9. There were still mammoths in Siberia and over in Russia for thousands of more years. They made it till about 5,000 years ago. But in North America, the megafauna went extinct at this moment. The moment of cometary impact or discharge. We think we're going to lean towards discharge makes the most sense because it's how you get the most cosmogenic material on all of the bolides. And it appears as if all these impactors had cosmogenic material on them. And in order to do that, well, the most logical way would be to have it explode above the ice sheet, and as it pushed out the ice, all of that cosmic dust is there to coat each of those projectiles. There's even Carolina Bays that have been located offshore. On the coastal plain, offshore here. Pretty interesting. And what I also find more interesting, if you look at the array here, there is a concentration in the Carolinas with lesser impacts to the edge, which would be indicative of a large explosion and a main trajectory. Because if you have millions of pieces, some of them are going to hit and deflect, so you are going to get a nice spread, similar to a shotgun shell, with the majority of the shot in the middle. So this is like an ice cap shotgun. And for some reason, there were only two major areas where the debris went. So it could be two objects exploding at different tangents. One coming in at this angle, one coming in at this angle. It could also just be the nature of the discharge. They don't necessarily go straight up and down, perhaps. We need to do more studies. But the beautiful thing is that Zamora has dedicated his life in retirement to study this. Zamora relates the impact that occurred in the Great Lakes area, which led to the formation of the Carolina Bays and Nebraska rainwater basins, which you can see here, to the impact event of the Younger Dryas. Although this impact event, as well as the relationship with the Carolina Bays, was proposed as such by Firestone in 2007, and we showed you that abstract, it was quickly dismissed by the non-impactors as invalid because no crater that could have produced it, no evidence of shock metamorphism, and no geochemical anomalies indicative of material from space were found in sediments of that time. Now, regarding the fact that no crater has been found, it is to be expected when a planetary body impacts an ice layer of between 1 and 2 kilometers thick that there would be no signs of shock metamorphism. We must find materials that can preserve them, which is difficult since the crater and its proximal ejecta were obliterated by the flows generated by the melting of the ice. The only hope for the moment would be to drill in Lake Huron and into the bays to see if ice fragments carried with them rocky material from the impact zone. And that's possible. So what you could find is the rocks from the Great Lakes region at the bottom of these bays, because maybe one of the chunks of ice had a rock stuck in it. And I think it's only a matter of time before we find rocks from the Great Lakes on the East Coast inside of these bays. So if you've been listening since the first episode, I think we've presented overwhelming evidence that at 12,900 there were impacts or discharges above the Earth of large cometary fragments that entered the Earth's atmosphere, wreaking havoc on the planet at large. Even if you were in the southern hemisphere, unable to witness this, the skies would probably darken shortly after. But you would feel the shock wave. We can just think of the Hunga Tonga shock wave. We felt it here. All of our animals reacted. So all the animals in the entire world would have reacted due to this shock wave. It would have been the largest seismic event ever, potentially in millions of years. And then after the initial explosion, the 9+ magnitude seismicity up here, you would have 1 million earthquakes, magnitude 7 to 8, all within a few minutes. Boom, 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 times 1 million. That is literally mind-blowing. So liquefaction, and I explained it earlier, is going to be happening even if you were standing on the surface and didn't get hit by an impact, you would sink into the ground, suffocate yourself. This is an extremely intense day on Earth. And it does appear that it was just a day. Now, what else is interesting in the proxy data is that this cosmogenic dust continued to rain down on Earth starting at this moment and peaked 140 years later. So the explosion and the discharge of these comets blasted billions of tons of cosmogenic material into the stratosphere. And it took decades for it all to fall down on Earth. So even the survivors of this event, anywhere in the world, would be susceptible to falling radioactive dust in huge amounts for generations, 140 years. And it might be that they had to hide, migrate, and move for those 140 years until things calm down. And there is a lull of cultural activity from the end of the Clovis culture to the beginning of the Folsom. There is a 100-year gap. That just might be due to no artifacts being found, or it might be due to this 100-year time period, 140 years, of cosmic rain. This would be radioactive dust falling for generations. And so many people probably realized that they were safer in caves. I don't know, but the evidence is so overwhelming. And the fact that Antonio Zamora, we're going to be able to have direct access to him and discussion, it may offer us some interesting insights into what we know. And what this might be revealing is that the frequency and periodicity of impacts on Earth may be much higher than assumed. And that has to do with the gradualism mindset versus catastrophism. And if we're just looking here at the North American map, when these bolides explode and then the impacts occur, the melting starts. And you can see the direct flow of the water into the Gulf of Mexico from the Great Lakes region in multiple areas. Massive outwash floods directly into the ocean. This huge delta was formed during the Younger Dryas outwash and subsequent melting of the Laurentide ice sheet. Massive rivers formed. There's evidence that there was huge flows through the Appalachians. And so we're not over with this discussion. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is all but proven to a certain extent at this point. And we're just adding more and more evidence, which is how good science is done, one step at a time. When the Carolina Bays were first photographed in 1930, everyone was a skeptic. Everyone. And then the gradualists came out with, here it is. The hypothesis was the hypothesis of complex origin, or more fully, the Artesian solution lacustrine aeolian hypothesis. Well, in that case, as soon as they began testing that theory, it didn't hold its weight. And yet still today, the majority of scientists believe in the terrestrial origin of the Carolina Bays, even after all of the things I've discussed are available publicly. The fact that cosmogenic material have been found in these rims in 15 well-spaced bays across the entire 1,200-kilometer field, they all had extraterrestrial signatures in the form of microspherules. Where is it? Yeah. Microspherules, iridium fullerenes with extraterrestrial helium, carbon spherules, and glass-like carbon. And other markers for extraterrestrial impact. And this was back in 2007. And 15 years later, I guess people didn't get the memo, or they're just unable to change the way they think. That's not science. You really need to be flexible. And with the preponderance of evidence flowing in from every angle in the work of Antonio Zamora, it's becoming ever more clear that a comet exploded over the Laurentide ice sheet Other objects might have discharged in other places in North America in the Younger Dryas impact field, lighting forests on fire, while entire civilizations were literally liquefied on the East Coast and some in Nebraska. And other civilizations on the West Coast were washed away in massive flash floods, thousands of times larger than anything that occurs on Earth today. And that's the tip of the iceberg on the evidence of what's going on here. Mind blown. Remember, Revolution Radio is the #1 listener-supported radio on the internet. So if you have a few extra bucks, go to freedomslips.com and donate. Thanks for listening, guys. We love you. Be safe.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And we'll be right back after this message.
Hello, my name is Mr. Rowe.